If you didn't watch my part 1 video, which you should have, because it's like part 1 and this is part 2, so it like comes after part 1, and I'm gonna go through every part, so you should, the part 1 video. Well, if you did watch it, you'll know that after watching Phantom Blood, I wouldn't exactly call myself a JoJo fan yet. I found it to just be filled with bland characters and events, not very bizarre and not much of an adventure as the name would suggest. But I was holding my breath for part 2. I knew that it was an entirely different beast from part 1, and I remember somewhat having fun with some chunks of it in the past, so I was curious to see how it held up to me. And now having finished it, I can say that a different beast it really was. So buckle up, because part 2 was a fucking adventure. A crazy, wild, wacky, over-the-top, other synonyms, and above all, bizarre adventure. By the way, did you know that I made a Twitter? It has like 0 followers, but I made it. It's there. You can follow it if you want to, or not if you don't want to, but you should. Or don't. I don't know. This part was pretty insane, and I genuinely don't know where to start, but let's go to the beginning. Part 2 follows the story of Joseph Joestar, Jonathan's grandson, and his encounter with the Pillarmen, the creators of the Stone Mask. And right off the bat, we have a big difference in our protagonist. While Jonathan was a noble, somewhat naive gentleman and ultimate good guy, Joseph is, well, this man is fucking insane, and I love him to death. I genuinely believe Joseph to be the perfect protagonist for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. As I said in the part 1 video, one of my main criticisms with it is that it didn't lean into the premise at all. There was nothing very bizarre about it aside from 1 or 2 specific scenes, but part 2 goes fucking crazy with it, and Joseph is the perfect type of character to elevate that element of the series. He's extremely goofy and just crazy really, but also incredibly smart. This is the type of character that can be constantly pulling some ridiculous bullshit right out of their ass and no one will bat an eye, and his over-the-top goofiness serves to really make absurd situations even crazier. And we have immediate examples of how well he works in the story when he meets Straits at the end of the first episode and fucking pulls a Tommy gun out of his ass. Where did it come from? I have no idea. Where did he get the grenades he uses immediately afterwards, and when did he plant them on Straits? I have no idea. But it's awesome. He tells Straits that he should have spent more time in the city. Araki, I think you have a ridiculous vision of how the big city is. And what I love about part 2 more than anything is its willingness to just embrace its own stupidity and ridiculousness and fucking roll with it. And to me, at least, this is what JoJo should be to begin with. Completely bizarre and over the top. Joseph didn't need to pull out a gun from his ass and to spawn grenades to blow up Straits. If Araki just wanted to stun him for a while, Joseph could have shot him with some Hamon-filled bottle caps or coins or anything of the sort, but he deliberately chooses something completely ridiculous and out of left field, like a Tommy gun that was certainly not there 5 seconds ago, because it simply adds more flair to the series and increases the bizarre factor. And the only one that could pull off stuff like this is a character that's equally as ridiculous and over the top, being Joseph. If Caesar or anyone else pulled Tommy guns or grenades and a whole fucking airplane out of their ass, it would just feel unnatural. This is a quirk that can only work because an equally quirky character is the one pulling it off. The man who emptied a Tommy gun into a restaurant full of people, the man who crashed a plane when he was 13 because blood got on his shirt, the man who can somehow completely predict the exact phrases people are about to say, the man who tries to become friends with the creature who just slaughtered a bunch of people in front of him, Joseph motherfucking Joestar. This man is truly the personification of wackiness, which is why I believe him to be the perfect protagonist for a story like this, for he is the only one who can truly take advantage of the fact that the series sells itself as being bizarre. He's just such a fun and stupid character. If you couldn't tell, I love Joseph. It is physically impossible for Araki or anyone to create a protagonist that suits the series better. Absolutely fantastic work. Going into the story, Joseph has to fight a now vampire Straits who was there in part 1. In case you don't remember him, he was there. He didn't really do anything, but he was there. He introduced him with that one other guy who was also there for like 10 minutes and then died, but he was there. The fight itself is usual goofiness, like straight shooting Joseph, but it was actually a mirror, which is so stupid, but it works so well because, again, the show just fucking rolls with it. I love this part already. We get some info and head off to Mexico where Joseph cross-dresses. We meet literal Nazis, and I'm sorry, is this bizarre enough for you? Because if not, we also have Aztec gods. Santana, suddenly a huge threat. One thing I really appreciate about this chunk of the story is its willingness to completely disorient you. I mean, the enemies in part 1 were regular zombies and they ate people, I guess, but this is on a completely different scale of bizarre. He crushes his body to go through small spaces, shoots bullets through his fingers, and fucking goes inside people? And to top it all off, Hamon doesn't work all that well on him. I think this fight is great, and it really shows the scale that things are taking. In part 1, we never felt outclassed by any enemies. In fact, Jonathan almost took down Dio in the mansion before he even learned Hamon, but this time the situation is different and the stakes are massively higher, which causes the story to take a bigger scale, and I'll talk about that later, but the effects it has on the series as a whole is really, really good. What we need to defeat these guys is exactly Joseph's craftiness and a bit of absurdity and luck, like fucking cooking him with the sun because it just so happened to be reflecting on the water. Normally it'd be screeching at this type of plot convenience, but again, part 2 rolls with its absurdity. It's part of the identity and it takes that flaw, I guess, and the ridiculous that it needs to work and makes it an advantage. But with that aside, we finally get to meet Shizar, which is when this part really starts getting juicy. Shizar is an interesting contrast to Joseph. At first glance, he seems to be the exact opposite of Joseph, but they're actually quite similar. Two sides of the same coin, you could say. Especially considering both have extremely similar pasts. You could even say they're almost two different versions that could have originated from almost the same person. The difference being, Shizar highly values his past, his bloodline, and his destiny, wanting to live up to their honor, while Joseph lives for what he has in the present and is only really fighting the Pillarmen because he pretty much got roped into doing it, which is what ultimately leads into their disagreement later on, but we'll talk about that when the time comes. What I really appreciate about the dynamic of these two, though, is that they're both extremely headstrong and have very vigorous personalities. Joseph being like this is what allows this part to be so goddamn entertaining. He makes any scene fun just by being there and is always the one leading the dynamic. But when faced with Shizar, they're constantly clashing to try and take that lead from each other. Neither of them back down and become reactionary. There's no Bukitsukomi dynamic where one of them goes along with the other. They're both constantly trying to be the ones to lead the situations and get the upper hand, which makes it so that there's never a dull moment. And this is something I greatly appreciate about part 2 as well, the fact that most of the central characters have leading and strong personalities like this, be it Shizar, Lisa, or fucking Stroheim even. They're all insane, and there's always going to be at least one, generally two of them on screen, and so every event gets taken up to 11 by their ridiculousness. Compared to part 1, where pretty much everyone aside from Dio was just a normal guy, just a guy, they're just there, and you can see how the story is absolutely overflowing with personality and style thanks to these characters, and thanks to it leaning into the bizarre aspect of it all and using those same characters to heighten that as much as it can. Thanks to his dynamic with Joseph alongside their similarities and contrasts, Shizar is really a super welcome addition to the cast. Long story short, Awaken My Masters, World's in Danger, and Shizar gets the absolute living shit beat out of him, which is a very effective way to showcase the scale the problem is taken, considering Shizar has been established to be the strongest character and the most proficient with Hamon so far, also showing, much like with Santana, that brute force is not enough to beat these guys and we need craftiness on Joseph's level. And that's what we get with Joseph finding Wamu and still losing, but having better results than Shizar, earning himself both Wamu and Shizar's respect. If there's one thing I want to complain about here, though, is that Joseph's clackers get pretty abandoned after this, which is kind of sad. It was a cool weapon, I liked it. Going back to something I mentioned earlier, though, I want to talk about how much I appreciate the scale the situation has taken and the effects of it on the story. Thanks to these world-threatening homoerotic Aztec gods, the German army being involved, and the search for the Stone of Asia and all the other bullshit going on, this battle has taken massive proportions, making it so our characters have to travel all over. From New York to Mexico to Venice to Switzerland or wherever it was, it's clearly much larger scale than what we had in part 1, where it mostly took place inside the Joestar mansion and in this random small city where Dio was making zombies. And thanks to that, this feels like a proper adventure. You know, now that I think about it, part 1 fails to live up to almost every part of its name. I mean, it's not much of an adventure. It's not all that bizarre, and Dio seems to be more of a main character than Jonathan. It's It's kind of depressing, honestly. So, and I'm repeating myself with this, but I really appreciate how hard Part 2 leans into being bizarre, being an adventure, and having Joseph be the figure that influences everything around him. And an adventure it certainly is, which is why, again, I really love the scale the problem has reached. It makes everything feel much more alive, be it the world of the show, since we get to see lots of different places of it, or be it the actual adventure, thanks to it being properly represented in size. It makes the story much more memorable and much more enticing. Anyway, going back to the show, our characters now need to become stronger so they can fight the homoerotic Aztec gods, and what better way to do that than with a good old training arc? Well, almost a training arc, but before I start complaining about it, I do want to praise what it does right. The pillar climbing exercise is really cool and very effectively puts on display the main strengths of both Joseph and Shizar. Not that we really need much display of these. I mean, it's not like we're just being introduced to them. We already know what they're good at, but I mean, it's cool still, I guess. Shizar displays his control over Hamon and amazing coordination by using 2 types of Hamon perfectly to get his whole body through the razor-sharp oil wall thing, even more so considering he had never tried to do so before. And while Joseph doesn't quite have the technical skill to pull that off, he still manages to overcome this obstacle with his out-of-the-box thinking, using the oil itself to his advantage. This exercise, while not super relevant, was really cool to watch and does introduce the concept of using opposing types of Hamon, which will be important exactly once in a little bit, but before we talk about that, I do need to complain a bit about this training arc. I've been praising Part 2 basically the entire video so far, which is completely unlike me, so I think a bit of ranting is way overdue. This training is really badly implemented into the story. To quickly explain, when you have your characters go through a considerable period of training, most stories will generally follow one of 2 patterns. 1, they show all the training so you can really feel the growth of the characters and have the satisfaction of seeing them get stronger. Which is what this seemed like it would do at first when it showed us the pillar climbing trial, but then it proceeds to gloss over all the rest of the training, which would mean it would fall into pattern number 2. The show skips over all the training so it can later surprise the viewer by showcasing what the characters learned or any new skills obtained. However, the thing with this training arc is it doesn't do either. We don't get to see most of the training, but even after it's done, there's no cool tricks that the characters can use or new interesting applications of Hamon they couldn't do before but now can. We're just told that they got stronger now, and that's pretty much the only thing that comes out of this training arc. Sure, they have to apply what they learned at the pillar to get AC/DC out of Suzy Q, but that's the only time anything that happened during the training is ever relevant. Shizar has his bubble cutter attack, but as far as I understand, that's nothing new he's doing with Hamon. It's just a new thing with the bubbles that he could have done even without the training, correct me if I'm wrong. And we have Joseph's fight with AC/DC, which happens over a huge pit of spikes, which Joseph could definitely not have handled before the training, but that's more of a background detail than anything. If the fight wasn't on top of spikes, then it would have happened in the exact same way had he trained or not. Well, but it did happen on top of spikes, you might say, and sure, it did, but again, that's more of a background detail than anything. I mean, it allowed him to set the threads, I guess, a bit more easier, but he did some bullshit with the rope against cars. He could have done the same thing with the threads here, even if it was a normal ground. No one would have really bat an eye. Their training results make like one cameo here and there, and then they're never relevant again. It did make Joseph be able to use his Hamon more consistently without tiring out, but training arcs in general have so much potential to pull out some really cool stuff, and JoJo tapped into none of that. It just feels like a big waste, and their training, at least to me, probably ended up being the worst part of the story because it really did not serve that much purpose, but oh well, let's move on. We had some weird fights at the end of the training, Shizar versus Master Guy, which we barely get to see, and Joseph versus AC/DC, which is cool, but again, doesn't prominently feature any sort of new element from his training. It's just your typical Joseph stuff, which is still great, don't get me wrong, just again, feels like a waste of a training arc. Despite that, the fight is pretty fun as usual, features AC/DC bawling, which is pretty wacky, Joseph bullshitting, you're outsmarting, the usual stuff. After that we have the Suzy Q incident, which again, the only other time their training is ever relevant. And on a completely unrelated note, goddamn, Suzy Q has way too much personality for someone with so little screen time. She's great, I love her. But going back to the show, Araki was not satisfied with just having Nazis in his story, so now we have cyborg Nazis. How did Stroheim survive? That bomb blew up on his fucking face. Welcome to part 2, I guess. Anyway, we have a little bout with cars and a really cool scene where Shizar thinks in the exact same way as Joseph and helps him out with his weird ice rope, which really puts the spotlight on their blossoming brotherhood, but not all good things can last, unfortunately. We eventually run into a problem and they have a disagreement leading into a fight and into them getting separated. And this goes back to what I said about them being two sides of the same coin. They're fighting the same battle, but for different reasons. And that's where the contrast between them comes in and ultimately leads to an unfortunate disagreement. Once Joseph hears Shizar's entire backstory, he's down to have his back, but unfortunately it's a bit too late. Shizar is already fighting Wamu. Which, by the way, absolute kick-ass beatdown where Shizar shows some new skills and almost manages to take down Wamu by himself. Definitely an awesome scene and satisfying revenge for Shizar, but unfortunately he ends up losing the battle and giving up his life in the process, which is an absolutely heart-wrenching yet beautiful scene. Shizar uses the very last of his strength and his Hamon to get the antidote to Joseph, and this plays into the themes of fate and destiny that are extremely prevalent throughout the entire series, especially from now on. The Zeppelis seem fated to sacrifice themselves for others, and in Shizar's death, he chooses to honor his ancestors and his bloodline up to the very end, much as he was trying to do by fighting the Pillar Man. And squeezing out the last bit of strength he has to move, squeezing the last little bit of Hamon he had, not to damage Wamu, but to help his friend in a heroic death. And the ensuing scenes are equally as beautiful. The admiration Wamu grows for Shizar and his choice to respect his legacy by allowing the bubble to reach Joseph, and the reactions from Joseph and Lisa trying their damn hardest to keep their composure but completely breaking down once they find the body, even if they're right in the middle of enemy territory. All these scenes, from the point Shizar gets hit with Wamu's final attack until the episode ends, are extremely powerful, and I would be lying if I said that I only shed a few tears. One of the scenes I criticized quite a bit in part 1 was Old Man Zeppelin's death, and the difference from that to this is like night and day. I'm sure it's getting annoying at this point that I keep bringing part 1 up and comparing it, but I really want to give emphasis to how Battle Tendency handles every element so much better, and how much Araki's storytelling evolved from then to here. This death works a lot better. It's a character we know a lot about, a character we had a considerably large amount of time to spend with, and a character that's overcome many trials with Joseph and had a wonderful brotherhood with him, even if they didn't actually meet all that long ago. This is a very powerful death, and the tone and respect it's portrayed with, be it through the directing, the narration, the music, or the amazing voice acting, which honestly is jaw-dropping. The pain is palpable, it's really heart-wrenching. Everything in this scene is truly moving. Absolutely fantastic work by everyone involved. On top of everything, also gives Joseph some small but welcome-ish development. As he says himself, he's lived his whole life only thinking about himself, but this fight isn't about him getting roped into doing it or about getting the antidotes anymore. He fights for the friends and the bonds he has now, which, you know, we didn't really get to see him grow into that mindset. He just kind of got changed, but, and you know, it's kind of cheesy, but it's whatever. Anyway, Coliseum time. Not before some Lisa badassery, though. I did want to mention that. She's fucking awesome, by the way. Anyway, the battle with Wamu is ridiculous. There's nothing much to break down here, but it's obviously a lot of fun, as always. I mean, Joseph motherfucking Joestar is fighting. How could it not be extremely entertaining? He's Joseph, and voiced by Sugita Tomokazu. It doesn't get better than this. That's the perfect casting. Also very fitting, obviously, that he ends it by using Shizar's bandana. Considering Wamu was the one who killed him, this fight was obviously emotionally charged, so avenging him in quite the poetic way, where Joseph literally couldn't have done it without him, was great. And I also appreciate the little show of respect we got between these two. I haven't really talked about the antagonists, since none of them are particularly interesting to me, but Wamu was an honorable man, I respect it. And then cars. What the fuck? Why is he playing her like a guitar? It's so stupid. I'm not gonna lie to you. a bit disappointed. You know, Lisa is a total badass, and I was quite looking forward to seeing her in action aside from killing that random grunt in the hideout, but nope, she gets immediately stabbed and doesn't really get to do anything throughout the entirety of Battle Tendency, which is a big shame to be honest. But at least we get more Joseph action, and oh boy do we get Joseph action. I honestly don't have much to say about this final battle aside from what a goddamn spectacle it was. A spectacle of ridiculousness, and I mean that in a good way. Where did he get this plane? Why can he fly a plane? How did rocks from the volcano perfectly hit cars and at the perfect time? I don't know, but I love it. Everything from the piranhas to Joseph throwing a plane into a volcano with cars to cyborg Nazi Stroheim coming in clutch. This final battle was the most absurd thing to come out of part 2 and out of anything ever probably, and fittingly so. Part 1 could never get away with having a fight with this many assholes, but going back to what I kept saying early on in the video, this part leans super hard on being bizarre and over the top. It embraces it and fucking rolls with it, and this is the only series that could feasibly get away with pulling this shit. And it's absolutely amazing. In fact, I was so into it that I completely forgot to take notes for the final 2 episodes. I can't think of a better way to finish this off. This was an extremely cathartic finale and a climax truly deserving of closing off this bizarre adventure. And then Joseph visits his own funeral. Part 2 Battle Tendency was an absolutely crazy experience. A golden experience, you could even say, ha 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 ha. With its crazy style, personality, fantastic soundtrack, characters, and bizarreness. For all that I complained during part 1, it's crazy how positive my outlook of this is. Normally an author's evolution in terms of writing happens gradually over a long period of time, but I have genuinely no idea how Araki managed to evolve this much between part 1 and 2. The difference really is like night and day. I truly believe that what Araki achieved with part 2 is absolute perfection of the series he created. I don't mean it's a perfect show, but what I'm trying to say is that he truly took the potential that the series had to the absolute limit and created the best story that anyone could come up with if given this premise. Every single aspect of the story is so insanely polished, except for maybe the training arc, that again, I truly believe he perfected JoJo's Bizarre Adventure with this. And him reaching the limit of the potential the series had is probably why he had to reinvent the entire thing in part 3 and make it completely new. If he continued to follow on the footsteps of part 1 and 2, he would literally never be able to top what he did here, which is why he had to try something entirely different for the next part. Whether that change was good or not is something I'll give my opinion about on the next video when I cover part 3, but that's that. Part 2 was truly a wonderful experience, and I'm so glad that I came back to give the series another chance. As I said before, I had some reasonably fond memories with part 2, but I had no idea I was gonna love it as much as I did. As of right now, I can officially say that I've obtained my cock-sucking license to become a true JoJo fan, and I can't wait to see what the other parts have in store for me. Subscribe if you don't want to miss that, but for now, thanks for watching.
With me.